Thank you, Aaron. So thank you all for coming tonight. It's just like old home week for me. I know so many of you. It's really appreciate you taking the time to come out and hear what I have to say. Some of you for second and third times, I think. So for those of you who don't know me as well, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how I came to be here, and a little bit of context for what I'll share with you over roughly the next hour. I joined Microsoft in about 2000 and worked there for 13 years until just February, this last February, where I left to join this or start this company called Navicet. And while I was there, working with many of you actually, I learned some really tough lessons. I started out in consulting. I ran a large practice in the East Coast and slowly made my way into IT. And part of the reason I did that was because I was kind of surprised at the quality of the tools that we had to use inside Microsoft. I joined a technology company and I thought, well, we should have really great tools. And that wasn't really the case. So it was a little bit of a mystery to me. And I started tracking this down, saying, you know, what is actually going on here? And over the course of several years, as I landed in IT, I ran an engineering team. I was a member of the Architecture Review Board. We did standards and helped develop what we called the ITLC, the IT life cycle, the process that we used for developing software. And along the way, I wondered, what was the cause of this little derailment? You know, why was the software not working as I had hoped it would? And, you know, I thought, well, maybe it was a problem of quality. Maybe we didn't have good developers. Maybe they didn't know what they were doing. Maybe we were doing the wrong work. We were focused on the wrong areas. So it was a portfolio management problem. Or maybe it was architecture. Maybe we didn't have the right scalable infrastructure. We hadn't made the right investments. Who knows? What could it be? And ultimately, I came to the realization that we were measuring the wrong things, that we had the wrong motivations. And so that even when people wanted to do the right thing, very often they were constrained from doing it by the systems that were in place, by their manager or their manager's manager. And at some point along the way, in 2007, we did a survey that was sponsored by the IT leadership, our executives, and they wanted to know how we compared, how we stacked up to the broader industry of IT. And we came back with some very strong measurements. We said on time, on budget, on scope was 89%, 89%, and 94% of the time we were nailing it, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, having come from the business and sort of wondering why I was dissatisfied. And it certainly didn't make sense to our customers either, because when we asked them how they thought we performed, they had bad news for us. In fact, the area that we thought we did the best in, which was delivering on what we promised, what was in the spec, what was in scope for a project, they said, well, you know, by the time you have a spec, it's already less than half of what I need. So you're not really delivering what I need. So even though we were measuring and delivering what we promised and thought we were doing pretty well, our customers didn't agree. And so when we went to talk to them, these are some of the comments we heard. You're too expensive, you're unresponsive, you measure things that are under your direct control, but not things that I care about. And so it just made this problem worse. You know, like, how many of you ever heard this, this idea that customers are responsible for giving you requirements? And if you build the wrong thing, it's a requirements problem, that they didn't tell you what they wanted. And if they just told you more clearly, that, you know, then you would be able to deliver. By the way, how many developers do we have? People who are writing code in the room here. Any managers of teams? Sort of, Bill. Any folks from the business side? Like supply chain, for example?
Project managers.
project managers, all right? So responsible for delivering a project on the business, like the supply chain or activation versus software delivery. Okay. By the way, I meant to mention that this whole deck is available. You'll have the whole thing offline, so you don't need to really bother reading most of the text. It's just there kind of as a reference, so hopefully it'll be useful for you in the future. You know, feel free to download it later. So what I found more generally is that the pattern that we were seeing in IT was sort of a common pattern that we were seeing in many situations. And in fact, any organization that is obligated to supply someone else with some sort of a service. So that might be HR, it might be LCA, or legal and corporate affairs, it might be a marketing group. You know, we always hear from the sales guys, oh, those marketing guys really don't know anything about our business. They're slow, they're expensive, they measure what they care about, but they don't really help us out. It's the same thing that we've heard about IT. So it's a common sort of general problem where there's a disconnect between what the organization as a whole wants to accomplish and what the team is actually delivering at the ground level. So there's a few painful mysteries that we discovered that we might ask here. And that's me, by the way. Broken collarbone there. It's very painful. So if you're a manager, you might wonder, what do I need to do to get my team to perform better? What is it that's missing? What do I need to do as a manager that will inspire better performance? And a really big question, it turns out, that is a huge predictor of success is, how can I create better team engagement? If you're an individual contributor, you might wonder, how do we measure our success? How do I know whether I've done a great job this year or whether I didn't do so hot? And if you're in IT, and maybe other of these supply organizations, it's a pretty common question to say, gosh, you know, my business partners, they're just not that accountable because they're telling me I didn't do a good job, even though I delivered exactly what they asked for. So what's going on here? And at least at Microsoft, I don't know how this is at a lot of other places, but certainly at Microsoft, the question that came up a lot is, why is it so time-consuming to collaborate with my peers? How can we move faster if you're a business partner? Why is IT so expensive? Why do I feel like I'm working against why is there this tension in our relationship? Seems like it should be easier to make progress together. So this is a topic, we'll start out with measuring business value. We'll spend a fair amount of time, going into detail on that. But this is sort of the linkage. This is how we connect it all. So I'll touch on each one of these. And I wanted to start with sort of just a kind of a checkpoint on strategy. What do we mean by strategy? So here's the definition. This comes from some business dictionary somewhere, which is probably one of the better definitions that I've seen. It's still not all that helpful. It's essentially a method or a plan in one case and sort of a military connotation in the other case. But I think of strategy really as more a set of principles and tools that help people understand what are we going to do and what are we not going to do. How do we spend our time in a profitable, productive way together to meet a very simple set of goals. So it promotes a sense of mission. And if you are wondering about engagement and what it takes to keep a team engaged, a mission and a common purpose is absolutely core to that. It aligns our effort because it allows us to prioritize, again, what work we're going to do and what we're not going to do. So fast forward all the way down into the middle of the team, and now you're thinking about, how do I prioritize features? How do I decide what scope of work makes more sense to do? If you're not clear on the core strategy on what we're all trying to do collectively, it's going to be tough to make those decisions. A good strategy has to be clear but it also has to be adaptable, which is different from being generalized. So if we say our strategy is going to be people, process, tools, that's where our investments are going to be. How useful is that really? I mean, sure, of course, we all believe in people, we all believe in teamwork, but recognizing what type of investments versus that we're going to make versus the ones we don't make, that's a little trickier. So if you have a good strategy you want to use to prioritize your work, inspire innovation, measuring progress is absolutely essential. If you're not able to use a strategy to measure progress, to know when that strategy is being realized, when you've arrived, then you probably need to shore up that strategy a little bit. If you got a great strategy, it's going to engage teams. If it's not engaging your teams, then again, you probably need a little bit more work. And if everybody feels like they have a common purpose, then they are more likely to work together rather than get polarized. So just to touch on this engagement thing again, in the context of strategy, I'll share with you a report that I've been already talking to some of you about by the Gallup group, where they studied, or they surveyed 25 million people over the course of, I think about 10 years or so. And in 2013, they published their most recent findings, which are essentially unchanged. And that says that 70% of the US workforce is disengaged, based on 12 questions. And those questions are things like, when was the last time you had a discussion about your career? Do you feel like you're doing important work? Are other people doing quality work? Are you part of a team? Et cetera. And they basically cover these 6 areas. Do you have a sense of purpose? Are you able to master your work? Are you getting better? Are you improving in your area of work? Do you have a sense of autonomy, or are you simply being given orders? Jim, I want you to do this, and then 5 days later, how come it's not done? It's past due.
Good work for you.
Are you being recognized for the good work that you're doing when you actually get it done? Are you sort of a guerrilla agent, sort of doing things that you believe are important, but nobody will ever know about that? Or is it actually visible? Do you have a sense of belonging, or do you feel like you're engaged with the rest of your team? And are you successful? Are you having an impact? If you have these things, chances are excellent that, or in fact, by definition, the Gallup would say that you're engaged. And it turns out that the teams, the companies with the highest engagement outperform their competitors by 2.5 to 1 on an earnings per share basis. Now, you might not be surprised by this. It might be sort of intuitive, but I just wanted to impress upon you the importance of team engagement, that is a predictor of corporate success. If you've got an engaged team and you find a way of keeping them that way, you will have better business delivery, better business results. So I'll come back to that, but before I go to the next step, I also just very quickly want to run through this idea of design, because it gives you a little bit of context about that target aspiration that we have as a design company, that's Navicet, for how we'd like to create engaged teams and deliver great results. So a lot of times when people ask me, what does Navicet do? I tell them, oh, we're a strategic design consultancy. And they say, well, what kind of design? What do you design? And I have to explain, well, we design, period. We help our customers design, whether it's strategy, process, software, tools, et cetera. And this is what I mean. This is how we see this. Design is a process that starts with understanding what the need is. What is that business goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Is it just on time, on budget, on scope? Or are there some bigger things that we are actually going to have an impact on? So generating that business insight, I think the first thing that's helpful is to say, well, we don't know. We're going to go find out. We're going to go watch people activate phones, for example, in the stores and see how long that takes and what kind of challenges they have and what sort of customer experience that creates. Or we're going to see how people interact with Xbox Live in the case of Microsoft. And we're going to see what the opportunities for improvement are. If you do the right work, that can be the foundation for a shared purpose. And a shared purpose with the right sort of interpersonal approach is the foundation for collaboration. That's what it takes to have collaboration. So what I mean by integrative thinking is whereby you and I might sit in a room, I think we should go out of the box entirely. And you say, no, 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 out of the box isn't going to cut it. It's not going to meet the need. We need to write custom software. So I think, well, let's see, what level am I? I'm a 60-something or other, and okay, you're the same, so okay, let's duke it out, right? And then we sort of fight and push until finally one of us emerges the victor and we win. That's not collaboration. That's polarization. And what we're looking for from a collaborative point of view is for me to say, Krishna, tell me more about why you think that, and how else might we accomplish that, and is that the only way? Because it doesn't make sense to me, so help me get smarter, and I'll share with you my perspective too, and you can contribute more creatively that way as well. Now, if Krishna and I are deep specialists in our respective area, but we are different, then that combination then is the ingredients for innovation. That's where new ideas come from. If we approach each other from that collaborative point of view, we're both going to learn something, and we're likely to invent something that didn't exist before. The key then is to direct that innovation and test it out. So we prototype it, we explore it, we try it with actual users, we measure its fit for purpose, and we see how it tests out. Does it work? And then we either decide to implement it, or we say, you know what, it's not quite right, let's iterate, let's refine, let's try it again. Now that's a very tough thing to do in a conventional environment where you're getting a spec. Here's what you need to deliver, here's your commitment, here's your schedule, your scope, it's locked down, it's signed. You know, what kind of room do you have for that process? Now here's an even harder problem. What happens when through that testing you find out that not only is it ineffective, but the assumptions that you made at the beginning were not correct? That you need to actually go and create or update your insights. And you say, you know, the problem that we thought we were solving is really not the right problem. It's actually this other problem. So maybe it's not activations in stores that need to go better. Maybe it's activations online that was really the key. You know, that as you shift from in-store activations to online, I mean, I'm just making that up, Jim, you correct me if I'm sort of...
Are you in here?
No. So anyway, this whole thing, the way this aligns with the topic we're talking about here is that this top level is the area of strategy. Maybe strategy informs this, maybe strategy is created through this process. And this whole process that we see here as sort of ambiguous, exploratory, a focus on learning is how we see teams actually executing, getting the right results. Those results have to be linked back to the purpose. So that's the idea, right? So it sounds very gushy and warm and aspirational. Hopefully we can all do that. There is a process that I'll walk you through for the rest of the hour here that shows exactly how to do that. All right, so if you're a project manager, you probably don't appreciate this much. You're like, just what are the steps? How do we execute this, right? So I'm there, hang in there, we're getting there. All right, so the first step is to get really clear about how you're going to measure business value. What does this mean? Is it, if your commitment is simply hit the schedule and do it on the budget, then you could pretty much do anything. You could promise any small thing, and as long as you hit the budget and you deliver it on time, then you might say that's success. And so we're asking, teams to raise their game, to raise their level of accountability, and ask, for what purpose? Why am I doing this? What's the reason? Why am I writing this software? Why am I designing this process? Why am I rethinking the platform or the architecture, whatever it is that we're doing? So when we look at business cases, here's some of the examples that we see. This is a really common one. Why would we do something? To reduce cost. Number one reason. Well, that's great. That's really what I think of as more of a topic. You know, that's an area that we might improve in. But what we're really looking for is something like this. Decrease mean cycle time from process start to process end, in this case incur to submit, from 21 days down to 3 days by project completion. And here's the structure that looks like. Yeah.
Isn't that increased speed versus reduced cost?
Well, you could see it a couple of different ways, right? If it takes longer to do something, then the reduced cycle time is very often maps to cost, but there's multiple benefits. So by being super clear, you're actually saying, look, I don't care how you categorize this. I see it as cost. You appreciate the speed because you're seeing it from a customer point of view, but this is what we're going to measure. So down is the right direction. We want to see it go smaller. We want to get a specific measure and a scope for that measure. We want to say, what is it today? What's our baseline? And what's our target by when? Now, what's powerful about this is that you don't actually have to know these numbers, because a lot of times we ask teams, well, what is it now? Well, we have no idea. Well, what do you think it is? If it were 21 days, what magnitude of improvement would be meaningful to you? And then you can go get the data later and then say, well, it actually turns out it's not 21, it's 35, or it's actually 17. But the magnitude of improvement, so instead of 3 days, maybe it's going to be 2.5 days, or whatever. But directionally, this gives you the foundation to start making changes and to begin creating coherence on your team towards a common objective. You recognize success. Here's another example. Revenue. We're going to increase revenue. Well, what kind of revenue and by how much? Increase first-time trial conversion from 7% to 24% by project end. Here's another example. User sat. Raise net satisfaction for first-time visitors from 93 to 120, however you decide to measure that, with a minimum response rate of 20%, because today we only get 6%, so we don't have as much confidence in the numbers as we'd like to have. Now, any one of these things at Microsoft, at least, would trigger a bunch of debate. Whoa, 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 I don't think that's right. What do you mean by 24%? That's ridiculous. We can't do that. And in fact, that's kind of the point here, is we want to surface those hidden assumptions, those personal biases, and get them out in the open and discuss them and knock them around. So you don't think it's 21%? No problem. Let's go find out what it is. Do you agree it's worth finding out? Okay, yeah, let's go get that. So it all starts here in the measurement. Jim.
I really like that you call us actionable metrics, and I like that there's developers in this room, because if we instrument...
Oh, sorry, yeah, Jim.
Yeah, for the recording. So I really like actionable metrics, and I like that there's developers in the room, because it's the developers that hold the keys to success of a lot of what you're saying. And the more you realize that, the more you can do things. So if I were just to say, let's instrument all of these metrics into whatever it is we're building, so that we're telling the business people through a dashboard, for instance, how successful they are versus them guessing. Because often if you don't tell them, they're going to pull the numbers from something else. And it's usually a spreadsheet with thumbs like, it's probably about that. But if we actionably put these metrics into the solutions that we build, then we're actually definitively showing the value. And maybe we're not getting the value we set out to get, but at least we have an accurate measurement of that, right, and a process to build that into the system. So this is awesome.
It really puts the developers in the driver's seat to contribute to those business goals rather than simply saying, what features do you want me to build? Right. Reeve?
Peter, I'm going to disagree slightly. I don't think the developers are actually in control. And the reason I say that is because if, in most cases, if a developer does exactly what the user has requested, it will end up being a disaster. And the reason I say that is because in many cases, users don't really understand what they want, which is one of the reasons Agile is so great, because they get to figure it out as they go along. But perhaps a greater problem is that in many cases, developers are simply out of touch with what the business drivers are. They just get a set of specifications to, here's a service, make it do this, and they don't understand how that service integrates with the bigger business problem that's trying to be addressed. So to me, I see design as critical because it gets all those questions answered, so when the developers have a specification, it makes sense not just as a spec, but in the context of the business goal.
So I'll respond to that with a couple of comments. One is I'll just point out that there's a big difference between users and stakeholders. And this is typically the sort of stuff that you get from executives, business leaders, stakeholders that are saying, this is the reason I'm giving your team $100,000 or $1 million or $30 million for you to try and achieve something. These are the results that I expect. Now, when it comes to asking users what they want, I agree it's kind of a bad idea. What you want to do is understand what users do, and what their pain points are, what their goals are, and then link that back to the business goals that you're trying to accomplish. And I know it's a really popular question. I heard somebody ask, I think it was last time that we were here, how do you balance users with, or user requests with business goals? And so we're going to see exactly how to link those together as we continue here. So you might say, okay, great, so there's 3 examples. How else might I approach this? And this is just a list of a bunch of those categories or topics and some potential things you can go out and measure. It's not the full list, just some random ideas that I've seen come up from time to time. And another way of looking at this is to draw this out using what I call a causal loop diagram. It's not just me, it's just what this is called. I call it just because that's what other people call it. And the way this works is that you pick any variable here, let's say corporate and regulatory compliance, and you ask a question. What if that goes up? You always start with that. What if that goes up? Well, if that goes up, the effect on technical quality, we believe, maybe Jim might agree with this. Maybe if you're not an architect, you don't agree with this, but that's up to you guys to figure out. The way I've drawn it is that as this goes up, technical quality goes up. As this goes up, risk goes down. So this little sign here is what tells you how that works. And so you can start reading pretty quickly. Strategic agility improves all of this. Service levels, as they improve, customer and partner satisfaction goes up, and as that goes up, that drives customer and partner loyalty, which leads to improved advocacy, which collectively all will lead to improved revenue. So this is what I would call an archetype, a general description of business value. Now, what does this really look like in the real world? This is a real example. We've done dozens and dozens, probably over 100 of these workshops for executives and teams at all levels. And I ask them a series of about 7 or 8 questions. And it starts out, how much money are you spending on your project? And they give me a number and they debate that for 10, 15 minutes. And then I say, where are you getting the money? Who's giving you that money? And it usually goes back to some executive. And then we say, why is that a better use of that executive's money, to give that money to you guys, than a morale event for their team to Hawaii? So that sort of sets the right level and says, oh, well, we're going to save money, or we're going to improve revenue, or we're going to get more agile. Inevitably, the first number that comes up is cost. So I say, well, okay, what if we just canceled your project? I think the cost of the project is more than you're talking about saving, so that seems like a good idea, right? And they say, no, you're missing something. We also keep Microsoft or T-Mobile safe, or there's some other benefit that we're doing as well. And so we say, okay, great. In a year, 18 months, 6 months, whatever the time horizon is that you're talking about. When I say how much money is your team spending, well, this year we've got FTE costs of this and vendor costs of that. In a year, how are you going to recognize that you've made some progress? And so in here we've got cost, quality of management information, which is accessibility, data continuity, data accuracy. I can't read half of this stuff, I'm sure you can't either. But the idea is to draw it all out. And this drives a really vital conversation. And it's not, just as a facilitator, you're really trying to sort of bounce what Ryan has to say off of what Jim has to say and see if you can facilitate sort of a common agreement about what does success look like. Once we're done with this, which takes this particular piece is roughly 90 minutes, depending on how many people are in the room. Maybe it's 2 hours, and how polarized the people in the room are. Sometimes I worked on a team. They'd been working together for 5 years, and they had no idea what kind of magnitude of improvement in the cost per certificate was reasonable. And it took a couple hours to kind of work it out. 6 months later, when they shipped, that's what they were talking about, is the cost per certificate, and it went from X to Y. So it would really help them align their efforts. So once we're done with that, then here's what it looks like after we put it together. We put a little bit of analysis into it. We identify some patterns that maybe we are already familiar with. So when somebody says quality of data information, management information, they might have thought that was something else. And we said, well, based on the conversations we've heard before, here's what we'd propose. Quality is a common topic, and people talk about lower bug defects, lower bug density. And we tend to talk about quality in use, which means what is it like for somebody to actually use this? Not does it conform with the spec that we talked about, but does it actually fulfill the purpose that it was intended to meet? And in that sense, we think about utility, usefulness, utility, usability, or ease of use. We think about coherence, and we think about emotional engagement, those 4 things. So we put that up there, and then we will take this back and we review that with them, the whole team, and they say, yeah, that makes sense. Now that really gives us something solid we can work on. And you'll notice there's a couple of measures in here that we've identified as the core measures. So if there's a couple dozen measures here, you don't have to measure everything. We just want to know what the relationship is so that we can pick out the few most important, in some sense, contradictory or balanced measures that we're trying to work towards that will be our best reflection of progress. Once you have that, you can actually simplify that down. In this case, the green boxes we realized were activities, things that people were doing. The blue boxes are intermediate measures of the activities and the outcomes. And then the orange boxes are things that we call terminal outcomes. These are things that are intrinsically and without argument considered to be good. You don't have to make a business case for why it's important to reduce cost or why it's important to improve service quality. Or if you do, then you try and map that to something else. And you say, if service quality is not an obvious business value, then why bother with it? What is the impact going to be? And the nice thing about this is the teams that struggle with the impact that they're going to have, they want to know, well, are we moving all of this or just some of it? Well, it turns out in some cases, they might be responsible only for this one box. And so then it becomes really easy to say, well, this is what you're going to move. And that benefits the rest of the organization, but the thing that needs to get measured is just right in these 2 areas, potentially. Yeah.
So how do you
let's see.
the key levers?
I guess we need a mic for you. Huh? Oh, yeah, I can repeat it.
So how do you identify the key levers? You have a couple of them identified here. Is that what they pay you the big bucks for, or is there like some methodology that you apply to identify the key levers?
We were asked the other day to help a large, organization with their hard drive management. A ton of them, fail, and they've got to figure out how the process works for them to maintain it and recapture warranty revenue. Very complicated stuff, and you have security considerations, and the drive can't go out of the the data center unless it meets certain requirements. And we said, yeah, no problem, we can help you with that. And they said, well, what kind of experience do you have with that? And we said, well, none. We don't know anything about that, actually. How can you be so confident in delivering that? And we said, well, because you guys are experts at it. You guys know this stuff already. You just have a little difficulty getting out of your own way sometimes because Jim is, sort of in your way, and and you've got obviously the right answer, but Jim has obviously the right answer too. So it's really about surfacing all of this stuff in a way where the intelligence of the team that we're working with really can come to the surface. So you might say, you know what, my experience is such that I know what the right numbers are. I've seen this stuff happen before. And if you simply agree, if the entire team agrees that this is what we're going to measure, it's a great place to start out. Now, you might change your mind as it goes, as the project progresses, but it's a great starting point to begin with.
You don't sort of indicate what the...
What we find is that for discussion purposes and for aligning teams, that the relative weight of one line versus another so far has not really been a make. I can easily see a case where it would be, and we're going to have to figure out how to either draw a heavier line or maybe put a metric on it that says this is more important than the other thing. But I think if you look at it and you use a little bit of intuition, you very often what happens is teams say, you know what, this, and that's what we're going to measure. And everybody says, yep, that's right, that makes sense. All right, so once you've done the initial work, you're still kind of way up there in the atmosphere. You're still thinking about big, lofty goals. You may not have these measurements operationalized. It may require, as Jim was suggesting, building this into the instrumentation of the application. So what's next? The next thing is you look at your organization's capabilities. So this is just an example from one workshop that we did that's been messed up a little bit. But we had define offer, manage policy and standards, manage opportunities, track assets. These were the capabilities that that organization saw themselves as responsible for. So you might say, well, what methodology do you do to break this down and come up with those capabilities? And I would say whichever one you'd like. Doesn't really matter. Very often when I ask teams for the capability assessment and I ask them, what is it that you do? It's pretty quick that they come out with this sort of stuff here. Generally, it's a verb and possibly a qualification and then a noun. Verb, qualification, noun. Getting a pretty good idea that you're onto a capability. So I'd like to ask, in order to move those dials on the previous slide, in order to get those dials to improve, what would have to happen to these capabilities? Where are you at today, and where would you have to get to in order to be successful? In some cases, like here, yeah, we're not very good at that, but we don't really need to be very good at that. It's not that big a deal. In other cases, we're terrible at it, and we absolutely have to be excellent. We look for key bright spots. Anybody that's doing this well, maybe it's inside the organization, maybe it's in a peer organization, maybe there's an industry standard that we could adopt. And this is really, we're just trying to give people some hope and say, look, it's not inaccessible, that the problems may be already solved. And then finally, as we talk about, as I listen to them talk about, why are we terrible at this? What does it mean? What would it mean to be excellent? I listen for certain key words. Well, we're not scalable, there's no automation, there's no compliance with standards. In fact, we don't even have any standards. So that starts giving me an idea of, oh, well, what do you guys think, as the experts, that you would have to do in order to move this from a 2 to a 7? So this, again, just sort of begins our journey down that pathway to more and more concrete actions. All right, so fourth item here, this is absolutely essential. Make it personal. So far, very abstract. Now we have to translate this into real people, or animals, I guess, in this case. The idea here is to make this personal for the people who are actually on the team. Normally, I would say have a picture of somebody, maybe not from your team, but somebody that gives you a sense of responsibility. I found this bear online, and I figured it was safe to use, so I did. So in this case, Bobby is an account manager. And he's been an employee for 3 years in the same role. He's married with a couple of cubs. He frequently works from his cave home in the woods. And here's kind of a little bit of a sense about how Bobby thinks. So the point here is not to necessarily think about users, but to think like users. So what is going through Bobby's mind? He wants them to manage his work and information in a single coherent place, not 15 different contract management systems. He wants to build relationships with his customers, but he struggles sometimes because he's a little aggressive. Here's some pain points. He's not sure when he gets credit for sales that other people make, or his compensation incentives contradict the direction that he gets from his manager. This is based on real experiences that people have. These are his goals. He wants to become a sales manager, but he's been getting feedback that he doesn't listen well. You know, who knows why that is. And he wants a great work-life balance. He wants to spend more time with his kid. If you can make this stuff real and then map this to the goals that you spoke about before and say, if we improve this experience, we can link that back to the business goals that we talked about. So that means that we don't have to measure those initial business goals. We can simply measure Bobby's experience. Now, one of the common questions that I get is, well, how many personas do we need? You know, we've got 50 different roles and 25 different standard job titles, and how do we get a comprehensive inventory and a mapping of all the personas? And my answer is always to say, as few as possible. Personas should be representative, not comprehensive. And you should pick the personas that, whereby if this experience improves, they're like the canary in the coal mine. They tell you if you have a gas leak that if this experience improves, pretty much you can count on all the other experiences improving as well. And if you've got a random experience that isn't improved, maybe you just hire some additional staff there because maybe they're not at the center of the link to the business goals that we talked about earlier. So creating the vision, now that you know who you're trying to serve, now we have to describe what is that experience going to be. If their pain points are, geez, I don't know where my deals are, my customers don't like me, it's hard for me to get a promotion, I spend more time tracking my pay and making sure I get the right amount than I do actually selling to customers. Okay, what's going to change? What is that experience going to be that you would like to see? And so, again, I recommend not necessarily reading this, but the idea is to tell a story about what that experience is going to be like in the future and how Bobby, the bear and the account manager, is really going to have a great transformation in his work life. He's more effective. He's achieving his goals. And this gives you kind of that tactical reference that your team can start working towards delivering. So Kathy was saying the other evening that she wants to know what's the case for making an enterprise employee's experience better. And I would say, I can't imagine that if your company lives and dies based on the people that work for it, how short-circuiting or shortcutting or shortchanging their experiences makes any sense at all. And this is kind of why. This translates that future experience into concrete terms and links it back to business value. So question somebody asked that evening, how do you balance these things against each other? The goal is to find ways of aligning them. and using your business goals to prioritize the experiences.
So the only thing I'm missing here is measurable results at the end.
Yeah, so that's a good point. The thing he's missing is measurable results. And so I would want to say at this point that don't stop measuring. So you have the measurable big goals, but now we have to find ways of measuring experiences as well. And you know, I don't know how broad this is. I know it's based on some published work. This is hot stuff at Microsoft these days, where we take a lot of the similar rules that I showed you about measuring business value and we apply it to what we call experience outcomes. So, butt on couch to opening credits of Glee faster than Apple TV. That's the mission. So we have a direction, minimize a unit of measure, how we determine the team as a team when we're good enough to ship, and then here's the outcome, starting to watch a known piece of content. So absolutely, the discipline of measurement is important to preserve, especially down here, because this is what gets you off the hook. You can say axiomatically, or by agreement, that if this experience improves, if this person is happy, that we're delivering business value. But then you've got to have a way of measuring this as a proxy for those other business values. Yes?
So are you measuring Bobby's outcomes with this, or are you measuring the enterprise outcomes?
Bobby's outcomes. This is a way of measuring experiences, individual personal experiences.
So the assumption is that Bobby's outcomes improve as the enterprise improves.
That's right. That's how you pick the persona and the target experiences, is as concrete visions for how you're going to deliver the enterprise outcomes. Okay, so getting tactical. Now we're starting to get into the weeds here. What exactly do we do and when? How do we agree on this? So we know that vision, it's been translated into something concrete, ideally something that we have control over by the websites that we build, by the APIs we build, by the integrations that we build. And so if you're, how many people are Agile practitioners? You don't have to raise your hand because I know about you. Okay, so as somebody, I want to be able to perform some activity, a business activity, something that I do that's independent of technology, in a particular location, using some information so that I can achieve some outcome or result or purpose. So if you have a series of these written down, the question is, what of these things would you have to do in order to create that future experience for Bobby? And you can map them out here and say, well, there's two ways of assessing each one of these things. One of them is to use story points. So all of the Agile practitioners, story points is sort of this very intuitive gut way that you can use to assess the cost or the effort of delivering. You know, what would it take to actually deliver this? Well, let's see, it's a simple piece of software, but the test cases are really tough, and I don't know how we'll be able to validate it, and it introduces a lot of regression risk. Well, you know, I'm just going to say, from my perspective, I think it's a 3. It's 3 times as hard as that other known story. It's kind of the way that works. On the other dimension here, you can use that very same mechanism of estimation to look at or to evaluate how important is this going to be for Bobby? Is this a big deal? Does he really care about it? And the ones that are super easy, that are like take no effort, and the ones that are a huge value for Bobby, obviously you want to do those first. If they're super easy, but Bobby doesn't really care about them, well, do them as it makes sense, as it's convenient. You got a piece of code open, you might as well bang it out and do those opportunistically. If Bobby really cares about it, but it's a little more difficult, then you probably have to evaluate the dependencies, and you do these things almost as you're required. And then, of course, if they're really expensive and Bobby doesn't care about it, don't ever do them. They're not worth it. Here's a few examples as an ISP account manager.
Sorry,
Yeah.
a second go back.
Sure.
So if you get a very low story points and very low effort, okay, so effort is like easy but high value, then you go,
Yes.
yeah, I saw that you have a...
Yeah, it's a little tricky. I had to put the arrows
The arrow,
in.
you have the left way instead of right way.
That's right, because you know,
It's
we
so
always know
natural.
that you want to do the
It's
stuff
so
in the
natural
top
to
right
start from
over
the
here,
right and go to the left, yeah.
I know. So I either had to put this box over here or, you know, it's the best I could do.
Got it. I mean, somebody needs to watch the horizontal arrow, which way it points.
That's right. Story point efforts, low, increasing in this direction. Value to Bobby, low, increasing in this direction, yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. All right, so here's just a few examples. You'll notice that nowhere does Bobby ask for a blue widget with the drop-down list of his territories, right? Nobody's asking for particular system features. Bobby wants to do something. He wants to track the last contact that his team had with a customer so he doesn't sound stupid when he calls them up. He wants to activate customers on behalf of an ISP, even though it's not his account. He wants to respond to trending report ticket topics so that he can sound smart and prepare when the customers are calling about a common ticket that is sort of happening in the ecosystem. Right? So he needs to be aware of this. All right, so to summarize it, to net it all out in terms of what does a plan, what do the deliverables look like? And I know a lot of you guys who are practicing Agile are going to go, this looks like too much stuff to do. And I apologize for that. It may very well be. I'm not really saying necessarily the depth that we go into in any of these, because I think you can knock some of these things out in less than a week for the whole thing. In fact, we do this on a regular basis. And it's not super perfect requirements or super perfect, you know, personas, but they're a starting point, and you can use those as a framework for continuous improvement as you progress. You know, going back to the design model where, you know, you don't, sign off is not as important as getting started. So business value, causal loop diagram, key measures, project and business KPIs.
So I'm sorry, so I've got a question.
Sure.
So you said, you know, you don't need super perfect personas and you don't need super perfect, I forget what the other.
Any of these things,
yeah.
Requirements.
Okay, but the point is to get started. Do you need to come back and refine those? And how much time do you spend, you know, when the projects that you kick off finish, how refined do they get at the end versus where they started from?
So there's some interesting dynamics. I don't think I have the slides in here, but you know, you saw it last time. I think last time we talked about this. It's an interesting dynamic. The culture in corporate America tends to be, when is work done? And so the instinct is to do a really good job so that it can be done. You never touch it again. That's sort of manufacturing smartness is don't touch stuff more than once, and then that's in the done pile, work complete, now on to the next thing. The challenge is that when you're looking at requirements, for example, the way that you're going to discover defects in your requirements is when you start building something. And you say, you know, it was clear at the time, but now that I read it, and now that I'm thinking about actually trying it out, now it turns out there's a bunch of questions it doesn't answer. So by getting started on the next step before the requirements are perfect, it allows you to accelerate your discovery of defects in that earlier stage. Now it sounds like you're sort of delaying, but in fact, if you, instead of taking 60 days to get all the work done, you simply take 3 days and then you go back and do the work multiple times, you end up with a much higher quality deliverable, and it doesn't take as long.
Well, so then my question sort of comes back to this diagram. And in your causal loop diagram, you've got lots of loops in there, which suggests that if you change this, you get an improvement here, which causes an improvement there, which may not affect that well, but then we can come back, we can modify these things.
That's right. Yep.
Loop around that. This diagram appears to be one-sided. You start at the top, you work your way down, you get to the bottom, and you're done, just like you said, when in reality, you want to get down there and come back up and rethink some of these things, maybe not all the way to the top, but you might want to make a choice and iterate back through at different levels depending on what you discover. As you say, you build it and you discover, my design wasn't exactly quite right. I think that's the thing that you've got to get business to get out of is that you look at lean manufacturing, you look at all these manufacturing things and stuff gets done, the product goes out the door, it's done deal. But software is a little different because it comes back again and again. And so you have to think about those loop
We like to
diagrams.
say that building software is less like building a house and more like making a movie. It's inherently a creative endeavor. And there's no right, every movie is different. Every time you build a website or a phone app or a widget or whatever. But I would say, it's a defect in the diagram here.
Start wearing a beret to work now, just so I can be a movie maker.
Awesome. Yeah, that's right. So I mean, I'm delighted that, clearly you're seeing this as I'm intending to communicate it, which is that, no, it does not flow down. This is not a waterfall model. Each piece, you take the opportunity to go back and discover things that are, sort of higher up.
So would
right.
you say that it's less frequently revisited at the business value level and more frequent revisitation at the scope level? Or can you kind of expect that as the scope changes and you learn more about the market, your business value has to change in reaction?
So
how would you measure
I would say it's
intervals?
both. So what I would say is that yes, the business value does change. It does evolve. You do learn. But if you're rigorous about how you articulate that and that the business value is not articulated in terms of features that you want, then it's more likely to be resilient to shifting design changes. It's sort of more of a common stance. But when you learn something that does suggest that the insight or the measurements are not the right ones, your organization has to be kind of operating in a way where they can respond to that and adapt to those new insights. Bill. Oh, well, Reeve and then Bill.
So this is awesome Sprint Zero stuff from an Agile standpoint. And if you don't want to do this in Sprint Zero, then this is still a great business exercise. So the product owner, when he gets together with a team, really has the information that the team is going to need to do a great job.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would just respond to that is to say it doesn't have to end in Sprint Zero. You can continue the work, but it should be sketched out as a starting point, as a framework, so that you understand what's the mission? What are we trying to accomplish? What do we do with our sprints?
So let me riff on that a little bit too. I agree this is a lot of Sprint Zero stuff, but the likelihood of you understanding your customer really well during Sprint Zero is actually pretty low. And so you need to go through this again and again. And I would say that the faster you can go through the entire loop, the better off you are, which is what Lean Startup does as well. And the last thing I wanted to observe is the stuff that you have kind of like outlined in brown, that's often like the dev team, and maybe throw the product owner in there as well. Whereas if the dev team did all of this stuff, then they'd be more invested and they'd understand better why they're doing something and how it's going to impact the business value. And so making the dev team actually go through the entire process a lot actually will get them more involved, and you'll get better results too.
So I love that idea. Let me show you this next slide here, and which is kind of a summary. This is my one advertisement slide. Aaron, if you'll forgive me a little bit. So it's not really an advertisement as much as it is a description of how we do things, right? So, when you look at this, that whole stack here, this whole stack up until about maybe a little bit into here, I guess. That's really here. This first box here, the business value workshop, we go as fast as we can, breakneck speed, like maybe it takes between 4 and 8 hours to build that entire stack. And then we go and we think about it, we analyze it, we go back, we socialize it, we adjust it. And so all in all, it's a fairly predictable effort that we go through to get to this point where we have a proposed sort of a common vision, some success criteria, the scope of impact, not the scope of work, but the scope of improvement that we're going to make and what the measures of business value are. Then we take this and we move into this next piece, which is a collaborative design session. And in this area, what we're looking for is to understand what's the most important work to do, what are the architectural constraints that we need to be considering, and what are the key dependencies. So what we're looking to accomplish is a sense of what's desirable, what's feasible within the scope of the project. So in this point here, this is the critical box, I would say. Here's where design really happens. A lot of this work, if you can bring the devs and the leaders and of the team that are executing into this work, awesome. My experience is that most of them don't have much patience for this. They're like, look, you figure out all those processes, you figure out what the important requirements are, and then, let us know, and then we'll start applying our deep technical knowledge of what's possible and, what the technology suggests, and we'll come together in this area to sketch out something that makes sense. Yeah.
So I was wondering, in the whole process, and especially when it comes to strategy, where are the competitors? Like, aren't we we're not looking at the competitors at all, I think, in the process? Well,
so it's a great question. You'll notice, I think a lot of you guys, at least, a few of you are probably Kaplan Norton fans, where we talk about strategy has to have certain components and we have to consider competitors and cost and customer view and financial view and so on. And really nothing in here dictates what the right ingredients are. We're not saying don't think about competitors. We're simply saying whatever you come up with, whatever methodology you choose, you have to find a way of making it measurable and useful for the team that's going to use it. It can't just be shelfware, right? So if you're hot on competitors, then definitely they should be in there.
Because I think competitors would degrade, they would degrade the business value, right? In a certain dynamic way. They would, if you are as a business trying to generate value, then the first sort of degrader of the whole value would be the competitors. Yeah. So somewhere, and I'm not clear on how it would organically come up.
So one way, if you go back to that archetype, I won't go back there, but if you remember the archetype of business value, there's one thing in there called strategic agility. And that means the ability to respond to changing market conditions and competitors. So that would be one area. Jim, yes.
Yeah, so I'm Norton and Kaplan fan, of course, but I'm also a Melbourne and Kim fan from Blue Ocean. And what you're defining here really does align more to Blue Ocean, where you're making the competition irrelevant. And if you look at T-Mobile, those of us that are from T-Mobile, we're very successful at that, being the little guy right now, but we're also very successful in doing things our own way so effectively it makes the competition irrelevant. And I think this is more of a Blue Ocean type strategy, but Miha wants to chime in.
Yeah, I wanted to say it from the other perspective. If you are obsessively focused on customer and listen what customer wants, you actually do something good for customer. Who cares what competition is doing? It's only what customer really wants. I mean, I work right now in a company that absolutely never looks at the competition. And we have a competition. We really don't care. It's just the customer that matters. So I like that. Actually, I enjoyed that you don't have a competitive dimension anywhere.
You can put competition in, you don't.
I don't work in this field, but I'm just going to venture this. Isn't the customer's experience essentially going to be the integration among the competition anyways? That they're basically sampling, if it's almost like an economics argument that it's an ideal market, and they're basically sampling it. And if they're basically giving you a feedback that you're improving their experience, then you've sort of already addressed that.
Yeah, I'm not going to respond to that because it's a big topic. I guess I could say that thinking about brand, for example, I know that if I buy another motorcycle, it is likely to be a Ducati. And so BMW generally doesn't have a chance. Be that. I have the right to be wrong, sure. But I do have a commitment to some brand, and I don't really care. Ducati doesn't have any competition in my mind, so yeah. Potentially. All right, so here's the last piece, execution. Here are just a few things that you can think about. My goal in bringing this to you is not to bring you big ideas, but to bring you some pragmatic, simple rules that you can begin thinking about that will change your outcomes. And here's just a few of them. Measure what matters to the business. Don't just measure what is under your perceived direct control. So give up, or maybe that's not the right thing to say, de-emphasize scope, schedule, budget, delivering on promise. Think about what your opportunity is to contribute to the bigger picture, and hold your managers and your leaders accountable for making sure that it's clear to you so that you can have the opportunity to act autonomously. If you do that, you'll have room for innovation. Make sure to take care of that, feed it, nurture it, watch for it, and do things that will encourage more room, more opportunity to invent and try new things. Translate things to experiences, test those experiences, and make sure that you're thinking about the business value in some personal way, in somebody's experience. Use that as a litmus test. Focus on what works. Recognize that I have a fair amount of experience in organizations that say, we're going to simply set a minimum bar standard, and then we're going to hold everybody accountable for it, and your job is to go and check and make sure everybody's compliant. That's a drag of a job to have, and I'll never take that job again. But if you can simply focus on the small things where people are being successful, fan those flames, recognize them, highlight them, ask your executives to sort of reward and reinforce them, that's a great way of beginning to make progress down this path. Don't try and bite it off all at once. Give yourself some chance. Recognize that each team progresses on their own path, at their own pace, at their own time. So focus on just checking to see how you're doing, refine, and then do it again. What's the upshot? I think I mentioned this before, but there's dramatic improvements in business value and productivity. The teams do far better when they begin to adopt some of these principles. We've seen it time and time again, roughly a doubling of collaboration, a 4 times improvement in velocity of features out, and much deeper team engagement overall. So the last thing I'll leave you with is this here. I have a collection of these they're around here somewhere. I guess either Lauren or Carla has some. And these are something we call Kiwi dials. And if you were going to measure only one thing, I would propose that you measure team health. Now let me explain how this works. It seems fairly direct to me, but I've talked to people that have sort of gone and not been successful using these, so let me just describe this. What you would do is take between 1 and 3, maybe 5 of these dials, and you would put them in your scrum room, in your team room, someplace, maybe in your break room, or if you don't want anybody else to see it, put it on the back of your door, and have your team come in and move these dials around. The only people that can move these dials are the people on the team that you're measuring. Right? So this is not a way for your customer or your business partner to judge how well they think you're doing. This is your team to assess themselves. What do you draw in, let's see, I think at the bottom over here, we drew business value and ability to move the backlog. Is there important work in the backlog? But you can decide by asking your team what they want to measure. And presumably there are things like purpose, mastery, autonomy, impact, recognition, and a sense of connection or community. Those 6 things. On the back, there's some ideas that you could start with and say, well, let's measure ability to move the backlog, executive visibility, meaningful work, collaboration, whatever it is, and then decide that you're going to measure those. Now, anybody at any time in the morning when nobody's around, or in the middle, or after a scrum meeting, can push this bird around. And if the bird's beak is pointing in the red, its feet are up in the air, it's obviously not healthy. And if the bird is on the pointing towards the green, then he's happy eating bugs. And anybody can walk in, if you'd like, from your executives, and there's no spinning of this data. There's no sort of packaging it into a status report and sort of saying, well, we just went on a trip to Waterworld, so we think maybe this is a good time to give the employee surveys. This is just like really real-time data. And you can use it then to decide, hey, anything that's yellow or orange or worse, we're going to talk about in our sprint retrospectives or in our stand-ups. Or we're going to try and take some actions to see if we can move this. And it's a tactical, very direct way of measuring something that we believe has a huge amount of impact on your team's likeliness or likelihood of succeeding. So we offer this simply as one, because we think it's useful, but also because I wanted to communicate that measuring doesn't require a Six Sigma black belt. It doesn't have, it's not a PhD thing. Certainly those skills are helpful, but start in the simplest way that you can. It's within the reach of everybody in this room to measure one of the most important things that will determine your team's success, and see what the dynamic is that it creates on your teams as well. So I think that's pretty much it. You can reach me here. Again, the deck is available at Navicet. We'll post it. I think Aaron's going to post it as well. I would love for this to be just the beginning of a conversation. I'm offering this to you as kind of a perspective on how we view design and execution and strategy, but we don't offer it in any sense that we're the experts or we know all the answers. We think there's just as likely to be some really super valuable information that you guys have, and if you would share it with us, we'd like to then share that with the broader community that we are creating and building. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming, and stay in touch. Okay?